Tonight, a traffic stop goes tragically wrong. That when a police officer shoots the driver in the head and then tells a very different version than what the video captured. The body camera having the whole thing for posterity, and now that officer facing murder charges. Just the latest incident caught on tape that's getting national attention. Then the first Republican debate is just 1 week away, and everybody's wondering what the guy in the funny hat will do. Will Trump napalm the rest of the field or actually act presidential? Also, comedian Jack Black, just one of many celebrities featuring in a new spot here supporting the deal with Iran. The question is, does anyone really care what a celebrity thinks? Does this move the needle at all in public opinion on the issue? We'll explore whether celebrities help or actually hurt the cause. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and tonight we begin with a stunning story coming out of Cincinnati.
This is, without question, a murder.
That is the Hamilton County prosecutor, Joe Dieters, and he's talking about the killing of Samuel DuBose, the tall man captured in that photograph. University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tensing, he's in jail now. He's facing charges of murder. He pleaded not guilty today, and he shot DuBose in the head after a traffic stop. Here is the video from the body camera, which captured the whole thing.
You have a license on you?
Yeah.
What's that bottle on the floor there? Bottle what? On you? I'm asking you a direct question. Do you have your license on?
I thought I did. I understand. Why did you pull me over for? I didn't even do nothing.
Go and take your seatbelt off. Stop! Stop!
And the video is stopping right before the single shot was fired that turned fatal. It is very clear what happened, but how the officer called it in is different. That was, I'm sorry, from another location, but the officer, he said that he was almost run over and that as a result, he had to use deadly force. Here are other incidents happening, but Officer Tensing also filled out a report saying that he was being dragged by the vehicle and had to fire his weapon. But as you can see from that video, that is not what happened. I want to go back to the prosecutor again.
I've been doing this for over 30 years. This is the most asinine act I've ever seen a police officer make.
As you saw from some of the other images we captured over the past year, this is just the latest incident where cameras told a very different story than maybe would have been filled out in a police report. Remember Walter Scott in South Carolina? Well, cell phone video captured him running away from a cop in April, the cop shooting him in the back. Mr. Scott was unarmed, and that officer facing murder charges. Remember Tamir Rice? That was a 12-year-old who was killed by a police officer in Cleveland because he thought the kid had a gun. It turns out it was a toy gun. No charges as of yet have been filed. Now closer to home, Eric Garner's death, also captured by cell phone video. Everybody saw it. Now when none of the cops were indicted, we saw the protests that flared up in New York and across the country. Now some say all this dash cam, body cam, and cell phone video confirms what some have been saying for a long time and maybe confirms some of the worst suspicions. And I want to bring in our panel right now to talk about this and much more. Mike Morey joins us. Mike's a Senior Vice President of Public Relations at SKD Knickerbocker. Andrew Whitman, of course, a Senior Political Correspondent, and Dominic Carter, as always, political journalist and author. And, you know, it's interesting. I think while there was a debate not that long ago, Dominic, about body cameras and whether or not it would help or hinder police work, and you can't imagine now not having body cameras, because in this story that happened in Cincinnati, if you heard the audio of the police calling it in and what he said, that he was being run down by the car and that he had to fire his gun to, save basically his own life, and that when the police report he filled out, something echoing it, when the video says a completely different story, you just wonder what would have happened if there wasn't the body camera to tell the story.
We already know what would have happened. It would have went down as the total version of what the officer said. Body cameras are a game changer. They're going to change the way all of this is being done. But I do want to say, Richard, I know the video is bad. I don't know if they're going to be able to get a murder conviction against this officer. And I just wish, it's horrible what happened, but I just wish that the driver had complied with the officer's request.
What I'm not clear about is, and when you hear the audio tape, and we played a clip of it, it was clear the driver either didn't have or wasn't being responsive about having the license on
Apparently
him.
his license was suspended,
Right.
but he denied
But
it.
the point was, he didn't make, when you can see here, a move that endangered the officer's life, nor did the officer claim he did. The officer claimed that he was running him over. Now, the officer obviously was by the driver's side door. He wasn't in front of the car or anything else. It didn't seem that he was even driving away. If you follow the video after the shot, the car rolls because the person was shot in the head, lost control, and it rolled forward. He wasn't fleeing or anything else. We can debate, and I talked about this to the attorneys last night, if a murder charge, if you can reach that threshold, but certainly criminality happened here on the part of the officer.
I don't know, Richard. Again, the video clearly shows that the driver put the vehicle in drive and was attempting to drive off. And the officer's hand was inside the car. So the officer's defense counsel is going to say he felt that his life was in danger. And, I don't know. It depends.
Yeah, so, there's a difference between not complying, which you should comply with an officer's order, but there is a very difference between not complying and not being in a situation which calls for deadly force. That was, look, we didn't see the whole video because there's more to that video. There was, if any layman looking at that video would see that there was no ever threat to the life of that police officer.
Once that vehicle went into drive, it becomes a weapon.
Well, it was no.
But Dominic, here's the point that I disagree. I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you finish. I don't agree with you that the car was put in drive and he was fleeing away. Only after he was shot in the head did the vehicle move forward and then rolled to a stop here because obviously he had no control over the vehicle.
But if you look at the vehicle, look at the video carefully. The officer said, "Take off the seatbelt and get out the car."
Right.
He went to open the door. The officer.
Right.
Mr. DeBose closed the door, defying the officer's directive, and then the vehicle started moving. He said, "Stop, stop, stop." And then, boom, the fatal shot to the head.
Correct. So the vehicle's moving away from the officer, and the
No,
officer...
it's moving forward, but his hand is in the vehicle.
No, so I don't know that this shows that the officer was being dragged in any way, shape, or form.
Right. It does not show he was being dragged. And that's the problem. The alleged cover-up afterwards.
So you take all this into account. So one, the vehicle is leaving the officer, and then deadly force is used, a gunshot.
But
after
his
someone
hand looks like it's in the vehicle.
Well, if you watch the video later on, which we don't show the whole clip, the officer is actually on the ground as the vehicle is moving. If he was caught in the vehicle, I'm not sure how one actually can, unless he's left-handed, I'm not sure how that officer goes in there and puts a bullet in the guy's head. But irrespective of that, there's a difference between non-compliance with an officer and that being a crime or not a crime. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I assume it is. But there's a difference between then using deadly force for non-compliance when there's no threat here. And what the problem here is so the body cameras I think are going to be a game changer. And actually, I look at it from the perspective of the police force. Because when you have poorly trained officers like this that pull their gun out and shoot someone over a routine traffic stop, they give a mighty suspicion for the entire institution of law enforcement. And that's bad for society.
But Mike, could I make the counter, and I put it to you, Andrew, that with now dash cam videos, with body cameras, and even with ubiquitous cell phone cameras all over the place, we saw in the Garner case, et cetera. Couldn't you argue the public's going to have, they can now trust their eyes and they won't always fill in, whether it's conspiracy theory or otherwise, that if video is present, and more often than not in these cases it seems to be, that now they'll at least be able to feel comfortable that they can be their own judge and jury as to what happened, mostly?
Well, they can and they will, but that's not, as Dominic alluded to, that's not necessarily how it's gonna play out in a courtroom. I mean, keep in mind, when juries see these videos again and again and again, even in the Garner case, there's some question as to whether the chokehold was a legitimate chokehold or whether the arm of Officer Pantaleo was further down away from his neck. So the devil's in the details of all these things. It certainly doesn't look good. It's terrible PR for the police department, but I'm not sure that will necessarily change some of the way that these things are determined in a courtroom. My big hope for this is that this changes police behavior, not just the officers who are now on camera the whole time, but this culture, and I think Mike hinted at this, within the police department, where bad cops don't get penalized. Bad cops don't get pushed to the side. And hopefully the police will do a better job of policing themselves, and we can come around to a safer
We'll have
police
plenty of
community
time
relationship.
to Andrew's point. We're going to have plenty of time to see how this plays out, if there's a plea bargain or whatever else. Officers, I believe, going to be convicted of something. We'll see if I'm right or wrong.
If I'm the officer, I'm not plea bargaining. I'm going to trial.
Okay.
And I think I had a good chance of winning.
I don't see it that way, but certainly I've been proven wrong on this before. Nonetheless, the one thing we've seen, not just out of these stories, but also, you know, what we saw were those two women, including one in Mount Vernon who died in custody, is I think there's going to be a rethinking if the crime itself is a low-level misdemeanor, or even is there a distinction? And I know law enforcement, it's a tough, I'm not trying to simplify jobs, but do you treat something differently than if it's an armed robbery versus somebody stealing crab
Sure you
legs?
do. And look, we're seeing actual political consensus emerge between the left and the right in this country right now on the need for overhauling the criminal justice system. So what I think is, again, the problem is that you have law enforcement is an important part of society, and most individuals involved in law enforcement are good people who know how to use their judgment when they're taking care of crime or addressing a suspect. The problem is that for whatever reason, I think we as a society have moved so far to one extreme in the way we deal with issues of crime and law enforcement, that the aggressive nature, both in terms of the very sort of street level, sort of quality of life kind of crimes that happen, are being dealt with in the same way in which we deal with some of the more serious and heinous violent crimes. And so overall, there is an institutional problem happening, whether it's the way we're training officers or something that's happening institutionally that needs to be addressed, which provokes these kinds of overreactions
Mike,
to simple matters.
I agree with you when it comes to what we do with them in the long run, whether they should be in jail, whether they should be in prison, bail reform, things like that. But for a police officer who's coming to the scene, regardless of the level of crime that they're investigating, they have to operate under the assumption that that person could be, and let's face it, in this country, oftentimes is armed. And so they have to protect themselves as though they're facing a deadly threat.
But take this as
and
standalone,
that
though,
speaks
Andrew.
to guns.
Okay,
and that
but
speaks
Andrew,
to gun
fine.
control.
And you know I agree with you more than I don't. But take this case in isolation. There was no moment at all where he thought that there was a gun or a weapon involved. He didn't call it in that way. He didn't write it up that way. There was no reason to draw a gun.
Even so, this profession by nature requires a higher standard of conduct. And so it is incumbent on the individual who's given the authority to enforce the laws and carry a weapon to actually make better decisions about deploying it.
But
and
in
irrespective
fairness,
of what you see,
you are
violent
correct.
crime, it is the officers, that is part of the job.
Yes, but in fairness to the Cincinnati Police Department, let's be fair to them. This was not one of their own. It's very important to keep in mind
police,
that this was a university police officer, and where he's already been terminated from the University of Cincinnati. Where he's in trouble with this, why are you, university officer, making a traffic stop a mile away over a license plate? That's where his legal problem is, and also in terms of the cover-up at the end.
Absolutely.
But I'm telling you, there may be an argument to say his life was in danger.
Yeah, but the cover-up is what's going to kill
The
him.
cover-up is going to kill him.
All right. When we come back, we're going to switch gears. Literally a week from today, we're going to have the first debate, and some people say presidential debate. This could be the most highly viewed debate we've yet to see here, because this clown will be center stage here. He will face 9 other GOP candidates, and whether you like it or not, he's leading the pack, and by a good margin. Everybody's prepping for the Donald, but what is the Donald preparing to do next Thursday?